Welcome to the Just AI podcast. My name is Paige Lord, and welcome to the Just AI podcast, where we talk about everything at the intersection of justice and artificial intelligence. So that includes responsible AI, ethical tech, AI policy, and AI in general. And today I'm so excited to welcome our guest, Alejandra Parra-Orlandoni. She also goes by MAPO. And Alejandra and I have known each other for a little over a year now, and it's been great to just sort of be in her presence and learn from her. She has been in the world of ethical tech and responsible AI for a long time. And so I'm so excited to welcome her as a guest. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about her journey from the Naval Academy to MIT to Harvard and how she found herself in her current role as the COO of Pasture Labs and the type of work that she's taken on now. We talk about a ton of things across the ethical AI spectrum, and I'm super excited to be able to share this interview with you. All right, and we are live. So, Alejandra, welcome to the Just AI podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Now, you and I have known each other for, I think it's maybe a little over a year, right? Did we meet in Oxford? No,
in Cambridge.
in Cambridge.
Yeah.
We met in Cambridge at a Responsible AI Leaders Summit and had a great time there. And then we've seen each other a couple of other places since then. And I've learned a lot from you, and I've learned a lot about executive leadership from following you and your awesome blog. And so I'm so excited to have you here today. To start, I kind of wanted to kick it off by asking a little bit about your educational experience. Let's talk about that a little bit. It's included the U.S. Naval Academy, it's included MIT, it's included Harvard, and I get a lot of questions from people all the time who are interested in getting into the ethical tech space or into the, responsible AI space or what have you. And they're like, what education do I need? And so I'm just curious if you could give people a little bit of your background that took you to all of these incredible places and sort of your motivation.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. I think I should kick off by saying that responsible tech and responsible innovation was never something that was on my mind when I was thinking about schools and where to go. The responsible tech work really has come together in the past several years, in part due to what is happening in the world and the types of things that have evolved since, especially data-driven technologies have kind of taken off. And I'm happy to talk about that today. But I mean, really, I wanted to be a musician. I toyed around with being an artist, a teacher. I was interested in oceanography. My parents are, they're from Venezuela. They came to this country. They're engineers, and so they were like, "You're gonna study something that's gonna put you in a good job after you graduate." And so, I had middle school teachers and high school teachers who really encouraged me to lean into math and science, which I was pretty good at. And so all roads seemed to lead to engineering. And then I had some teachers that suggested I look into the Naval Academy for college. I had no idea what it meant to go into the military. I had some friends that had gone into the Naval Academy, and I was so impressed with their uniforms and like the whole challenge of it all, and just how interesting it seemed. So I ended up deciding to go to the Naval Academy. I chose that over, some of the more traditional colleges, but I studied autonomous control systems. So my major was formally a bachelor's of science in systems engineering, and I worked on autonomous underwater vehicles, autonomous water vehicles, and those sorts of things. And this was before machine learning was cool. So it was it's kind of, you call it classical control systems is what I studied. And there was a lot of military training and tons of opportunities to practice leadership, but responsible innovation was, I don't even think it was a real phrase back then, or if it was, like, I had never heard of it. And so I was just learning engineering and trying to survive at the Naval Academy. And while I was there, there were these limited options for attending graduate school. So the way it works is, when you're in one of the academies, you apply to a particular program that the Navy sponsors, and you have to get chosen by the Navy to go into one of these graduate programs. And then you also have to apply to the school and get accepted into the school. And so there was one program called the MIT Woods Hole Oceanographic institute program that I thought sounded really cool. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to apply to that one and only that one, because that seems like the most interesting program that is available to me at the time. Because I actually was really eager to get out into the fleet and, be a naval officer and do all the things that we had been learning about while at the Naval Academy. I never in my life thought I would get into a place like MIT. So I applied, I expected there to be a rejection, and I got in and I was like, oh, okay, cool. So I did that, and it was really interesting. So while I was there, formally, I was part of what they call Course 2, which is mechanical engineering. But practically, it was kind of an extension of my control systems work. So it was a blend of mechanical engineering and electrical engineering, a lot of programming, and then hardware, software interface stuff. But while I was there, I mean, I was surrounded by some of the most talented, you can imagine. I was at MIT, surrounded by these like super talented engineers. And at that time, it's when I started to wonder, like, is engineering what I want to do? Like, it's interesting, but I'm surrounded by these people who are, virtuosos at that. And I started to get really interested in things like, well, why are we building the things we're building? And I got really curious about what motivated the different people around me to get into whatever it is that they were going to study for the next like 7 or 8 years of their lives. And I never at that time I didn't think anything of those thoughts. But it was, in retrospect, I think that was like the first time I started thinking like, what might I want to do like when I grow up? Uh, and then I graduated from there, and then I had to go into the Navy and do my service. I did a couple of deployments, and we did a shipyard tour. And after 6 years, I thought, okay, maybe it's time to get out of the Navy and do something else. And again, like there was no responsible innovation on my mind. Had never heard of it, didn't know what it was. And in fact, I remember still not really being sure what I wanted to study. I kind of wanted to go into behavioral economics for some time. I toyed around with going into finance and going to Wall Street. Now I laugh, like thinking about that. I think I would have been a terrible fit for that kind of life. but, um, but
An
I
artist on
was,
Wall Street. So
yeah, yeah. It's just like, I don't know. But it seemed like a viable option at the time, and a lot of my friends who got out, went into finance and had a fantastic career. Um, but I remember, in the Navy, you get quite a bit of exposure to, regulations. You have to follow regulations. You get exposure into the law of the sea, which is so fascinating. A lot of statecraft, and I had some opportunity to get exposure to the very kind of shockingly delicate structures that keep our world turning. So somewhere I must have gotten the idea that it would be cool to become a national security lawyer, and, maybe I should go to law school or something. So, I'm not kidding. I remember one day I was watching Legally Blonde, and I was like, oh, I think I'll be like Elle Woods and I will go to Harvard. That's what I will do. And by the way, at the time, the legal profession was really struggling. So in the news all the time, there were reports of people going to law school, going into debt, and not being able to get a job. So the Harvard thing was both, a Legally Blonde inspired thing, but also a very practical thing. Like I wanted to make sure I graduated from a place where I could get a job after graduation. And Harvard was so cool to me because you could cross register into the business school and to the college. And, as you can probably gather, I have interests in all sorts of directions. And so I felt like Harvard would be a good place for me to not feel boxed in or, kind of stuck. And so, yeah, I went to law school, and, that was it. The big theme was, I'm curious about a lot of different things. I tried to always continue to keep learning. I still try to do that to this day, whether or not it's through formal institutions. Not afraid to dive into new areas that, were a challenge or something I wasn't familiar with before. And I've always tried to challenge myself and, punch above my weight, or at least how I perceive myself. And, I think that some of those things have then allowed me to almost stumble into what we now might call responsible tech or responsible innovation. But none of that education had anything to do at the time with responsible tech or responsible innovation. Only now in retrospect do I realize that I learned so much that's 100% applicable.
Yeah, I think that is something, as when I'm having these conversations with people who are like, what's the degree? What's the certification? What's the thing? And it's like, if first of all, I tend to live by the, and not everybody loves this, which I get. People are like, some people are like, don't talk to me about this. But I really believe if it's meant for you, it won't pass by you. And some people want like the formula, like this is the thing. You need to go into the Naval Academy, and then you need to go to MIT, and then you need to go to law school, and then you've got to go. And they want to know that that's the path. And in some cases, there are paths, right? You want to be a doctor, there are paths you have to follow. But I think in terms of, ethical tech or responsible tech or whatever, responsible AI, whatever term you want to use, there's definitely a degree of following your interests and your passion and then just trying to make really thoughtful, educated guesses. That's terrible. People don't like that. They don't want to hear that, but that's the best I can give for that. I'm curious, you've got the Naval Academy, you've got MIT, you've got Harvard Law. Is there one of those three that shaped you more than the others?
I mean, I think the answer is no, with a caveat that, you know, I was youngest at the Naval Academy, and so I'm sure that there are some kind of formative moments that I had there, just given the age and stage of my life. But I think all three of them have I've just learned so much from all of them. So, the Naval Academy was definitely a really, it's kind of like jumping into the cold ocean of leadership and organizational leadership in particular. Like, you kind of just have to learn to do it by doing. And they provide a lot of formal curriculum around it and feedback and opportunities to learn and fail and learn more and all of that. So I think the Naval Academy was really helpful for learning not how to be the best leader, because you don't learn that when you're 22. I mean, you can learn a lot about that when you're 22, but you learn that over many years. But the Naval Academy was really good at teaching me about the importance of organizational leadership. And I think that's really important for responsible tech because, um, to me, at least in my experience, responsible tech involves collaboration across all the disciplines, all the teams, all the functions. And at the end of the day, it is a people challenge, not really a tech challenge. So I think the Naval Academy was really good for that. But I will say that, MIT and Harvard were both places that were really challenging me in terms of identifying assumptions, in helping me to become a much better problem solver, in exposing me to the connections between philosophy and things like our legal structures, or things like our scientific method and some of the philosophies behind that. And those organizations really helped me to start connect like big idea type stuff. And I think that's definitely influenced and informed the way I think about things like responsible tech.
Yeah. Wow. Well, you've definitely had an interesting sort of educational background. I love hearing about it. I've asked you to share that with me a couple times, sometimes in our just personal chats, and I'm always really inspired by it. And I was inspired by Elle Woods too. I was like, if anyone's gonna get out there and make it happen, it's her. So, um, you've also, so you went to law school, you graduated, you've worked at a law firm, you've worked as general counsel for a large company, you've done policy work, and then you were the VP of Ethical Innovation and Privacy. I'm curious if you wouldn't mind sharing, because, and I'm going to ask you about your current role in just a minute, but if you wouldn't mind sharing, what is a VP of Ethical Innovation? What does that kind of a role look like?
Well, I will start by saying that I think when we see titles like VP of ethical innovation or, responsible innovation manager or anything like that. I think what we're starting to see a little bit more of is this recognition that there are these roles that are trying to tie together a lot of things that impact how we build products and how we bring things to market and how we decide to bring things to market, but they're roles for which there's not like a traditional title. So it's like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this other thing. Let's call it responsible innovation. So I say that because it's not a standard title, as you know. Different companies will use different nomenclature for these types of roles, and my experience of these roles is almost certainly going to be different than someone else's experience of these roles. For me, what it meant was an opportunity to bring product strategy, experience design, bit of risk mitigation, and probably a splash of compliance, and kind of bring that together in a way that became actionable. So bringing some of those ideas and concepts together in a way that's actionable for teams to actually build things. Structure ways in which we might make decisions, which involves designing the right questions to ask, designing when we ask them in the process of building something, getting people's mindsets to align with this notion of creating value and viable, business, uh, viably money making products,
Yeah.
while also protecting value. So what I mean by that is, if we're going to create something that is going to make money in the market, what might that destroy along the way, and are there elements of what we might destroy along the way, things that we actually want to protect? So a lot of the things that come up in that context are things like fairness and concepts like privacy rights and things like that. So for me, that's what it was. It was a blended uh, bunch of different capabilities, and what my job at that time was to create a set of capabilities that ran across different functions and got people to think about how to build in a way that we could be proud of, and that was really aimed at balancing an innovative mindset with a risk mitigation mindset without killing the innovation part, because that's also very, very easy to do, or without killing, downgrading the risk mitigation part too much as well, which also happens in organizations. So that's what it was for me, but I can guarantee you that anybody in this space is going to have a slightly different take on what their role is.
Totally, totally. And I think about this a lot because I feel like I consistently say to people who ask questions about roles and in the responsible AI world or ethical tech world, they'll be like, that's not even a real thing. They'll say this kind of a role isn't even a real thing. And I have to say, none of this is real. The only reason money works is because we all agree that it works. Like the only reason the law
Yes.
works is because we all agree. Like all of it's fake and we just have, and so and I just use those as examples to, and I think reasonable minds would differ on these things, but I get that from people a lot who will be like, well, this type of a role isn't real, but it's real because we make it real, because we put somebody's their talent and their time and their energy toward thinking about things that maybe other people aren't thinking about. And maybe they have a title that is going to be a title that's brand new to the business world, or maybe they have a title that will be around for a while, but not forever. But it doesn't mean that the job doesn't have something to contribute, right? To,
Yes.
so anyway, I think that was a really beautiful explanation of the work that you were doing. And I just really love that. But now you're the COO of Pasture Labs. I am very interested in hearing a little bit more about what you're doing at Pasture Labs right now.
Oh yeah, I'm happy to share. So Pasture Labs is quite different for me compared to where I've just come from, which is a pharmaceutical company, and then before that, I was at Meta, which is a consumer facing product. And then before that at QB and law firms, which are essentially, service organizations, with serving clients. So Pasteur Labs is a company that is building software to help with simulation in industrial R&D. So, any company that's designing and building materials for aerospace, for energy sector, medical devices, these are all, this is all work that requires extensive engineering design, a ton of testing, and precision really matters. So, rounding errors are they're not just a throwaway. If you have something, a tiny medical device, and there's a particular way that the blood, as an example, has to flow through a particular component of that medical device, you can't just guess.
Yeah.
It's got to be exact.
Which we
So
appreciate. Yeah, we
yeah,
appreciate
yeah,
it.
yeah. So a lot of these types of components and pieces of machinery, uh, it's not cost effective to do a quick sketch on a piece of paper, manufacture it, and then see if it works and then iterate on that. Like you can imagine that would not work out, especially in situations like aerospace where you're building, a plane. You can't just build a plane and see how it works and then like iterate on the design. So what has been happening for decades and decades is you'll have an engineer that will design, based on their experience and expertise, design a part or design a system or whatever. And then they'll feed that design into some software that helps to simulate how that design functions and operates in the real world. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of limitations to these simulations. You have to be really particular and specific about the defining the environment, about setting all these different kinds of parameters around the simulation, and even then the simulation will tell you what might happen theoretically, and then you try it out in the real world, it's going to be different. So we're trying to help take that simulation process and do a few things with it. We're trying to make it faster using scientific machine learning. We're trying to make it easier for people to use because a lot of these legacy pieces of software are they're kind of finicky. Like there are a lot of things you have to click and you have to you almost have to be an expert in the software itself in order to actually make use of it. So we're trying to help make the UX a little bit smoother. And then the other thing we're trying to do is um, make the actual, because it's faster and because it's easier to use, what we're hoping to do is do something that we might call like expanding the design space. So because it's faster, because it's easier to use, that means we can iterate on designs more quickly. And so whereas before some engineer might design one thing and be able to iterate maybe twice on the design, and then at that point, like it's time to take it to manufacturing, and then you got to kind of make sure it works, and then build the thing. What we're trying to do is make it so that you can do many more iterations on the design. Maybe try out kind of a crazy design that isn't as conventional, and then allow that to happen in a time scale that is acceptable to organizations, and then then go to manufacture and things like that. So it's really, really cool. And I've been learning a lot about scientific machine learning and about some of the techniques that are required to do this in the world of physics. So keeping the fidelity to the physics, it's fascinating. So I'm learning a ton. I am surrounded by people who are like the experts in the world in their specific areas of expertise in scientific machine learning. So I have a very steep learning curve, and they've been phenomenal at explaining some of the things to me. But it's a very different place from say Meta, where we have like recommender systems, and different types of applications of AI and now generative AI that they're using a lot of for consumer facing app that's meant to be used by billions of people. The Pasture Labs world is very much for an industrial R&D space, but it carries different kinds of real world risks that usually manifest in, how safe something is that you maybe use every day, like a metro or an
Yeah.
airplane or a medical device or whatever.
Yeah, it sounds like it's a lot of, and you'll have to forgive me for simplifying. This is not my area of expertise, but it sounds like it's a lot of the stuff that we just use. We're just the recipients of certain things, and we don't see all of the work that goes into it behind the scenes. But that behind the scenes work of building something or creating something or designing something is a little bit more of a cumbersome process right now. And so the work that you're doing is to try and simplify that, make and then allow companies to be able to actually get on with innovation, but expand their ability to innovate too. Because if you only have
Yes.
3 tries within your budget to get something right, then you're not going to take any risks to see if there's something you could do better. You're just going to go for those 3 tries, right? So if you can do 15 tries within your budget now because it's a less expensive process, am I getting that right?
Absolutely. That's so right. And one of the areas that we're exploring are things like a little bit, I'll call them lower risk in the sense that they're not relating to an aircraft wing. But um one of the areas that we're looking into is, for example, consumer wearables. So imagine like a sneaker. That is something that, if you go behind the scenes into a place like Nike or Adidas or New Balance or like any of your, favorite sneaker companies, there's an engineer who's sitting behind the scenes like designing the shoe, making sure that your foot is going to be supported in just the right way, and they don't just like draw it on a piece of paper and then like go build it. Like there's many steps in between that where they will actually build a computer model of it, and then they will simulate what it might look like for like when you step on the shoe, what happens. Like does the sole support your foot well enough? Is it soft enough for you to feel that it's comfortable, but still kind of providing the support you need so that you're not like sinking all the way through? All of those things are done through these computer simulations. And then, to your point, depending on whatever the budget or the timeline is, because these simulations are so complex to design and because the simulations themselves sometimes take so long to run, you'll get 2 or 3 tries, and these very talented people, they'll still design it something great, but imagine if they could go through 10 tries or 20 tries. Can you imagine the shoes we might get out of that? It'd be amazing.
Yeah, it would be excellent. We could finally get a high heel that wasn't rolling ankles.
That's right.
Which have by the way, have you seen the sneaks? Sarah Blakely's sneaks? And here's the thing is I'm a huge Sarah Blakely stan. I love her. I have my business account for a long time. She was the only person I followed on my business account
It's
because I
amazing.
just love her so much. But I haven't bought a pair of sneaks yet because I don't know if I have the riz to pull them off. And that's just a personal thing for me. That's not anything against the shoe, but I genuinely don't know. And I'm curious, would you like to register an opinion or would you like to plead the fifth?
I can tell you wholeheartedly that I could not pull them off. They're not my thing. I think that they're interesting. I think those shoes are interesting. I think they challenge a lot of categories for shoes, which is always kind of interesting in fashion when something challenges a category. I don't know if they'll stick around. I don't know.
Yeah, and I wouldn't bet against Sarah Blakely, but I do also think that when she was talking about building a shoe that was like as comfortable as a sneaker, I did not expect the heel to look like a sneaker. That's what I didn't expect. I was expecting it to be as comfortable as a sneaker, but I did not expect it to look. Just was not ready for it. So anyway, and I need to figure out if my Riz can stand up to the sneak. Um, Thank you for that sidebar because I've been dying to talk to somebody about this. And Kurt is done. My husband's done hearing about it. He's like, so anyway. So okay, I have a question. You've been in this space for a while, right? Like you've given us the background on how you got into sort of responsible AI, ethical tech, ethical innovation, this space. What do you think is the biggest misconception about the idea of responsible AI or ethical innovation?
Yeah. I I would say that there are, well, I can never just do one thing. So I'll say there are two things. So I think the first is, and I don't think everyone thinks this, but I do think it's a big misconception that responsible innovation is about complying with laws and following rules. I think there are enough people who think that, and I've heard it enough times that I'm like, oh, that's an interesting take. I think it's a misconception for a few reasons. Number one, there aren't really a set of rules to follow. There are increasing numbers of regulations that apply to how we use data overall, and obviously there's the EU AI Act, and there are going to be AI laws popping up everywhere in the next few years. But there aren't really like a well settled set of rules to follow. Um, so I think practically that approach doesn't work. The other part of it is that, responsible innovation, it's about ethics, which, we use the word ethics in AI ethics loosely, but if you think about what ethics is, it's moral philosophy. It's philosophy. So, most of us don't sit around thinking about philosophy all the time, but that's really the part of the heart of it. Related to philosophy, but slightly different, are social norms, which sometimes come from, you know, philosophical positions and moral positions that we may have as a society. Sometimes they just come from cultural evolution and lot of different places, but there are these norms and expectations that we have. And then of course sometimes those things turn into rules and regulations and things like that. So I think that's a really big misconception, and thinking about responsible innovation as something that you can do by following this set of rules is I just think is just not true. And then the other problem is if you flip it, the danger with that is that some people think that, well, if I follow these rules, then we're good, then we're ethical. And and I
I've
mean,
done it.
I don't know if you've come across this, but I've come across that kind of thinking enough times to know that it is how some people are taught or learn to think about this, and that's one big misconception. Um, I think the other one is that, and I hear this one a lot too, is that responsible innovation is about the good outweighing the bad. So let's do something that does more good in the world than it does bad in the world. I mean, there are a lot of different ways people say that. And I think it can sound really convincing sometimes, like, oh yeah, that is responsible. It's responsible to do something that does more good than bad in the world. But I think it's tricky because, again, that's philosophy. That's the utilitarian principle. Some of us remember learning about that in school, and I think it's a helpful principle sometimes, but it's not the only way to think about responsible innovation. Like, I don't know, do you remember the MIT's Moral Machine, when they put out this like app where you could answer questions about whether a car should save this group of people versus that group of people? So like, do
Yes.
you want to save one child or three adults if you get to decide what this autonomous vehicle is going to do? Do you remember
Yes,
that?
I remember. I'm like pulling it up on my phone right now, looking at it. But yes, the car that knew too much, it asks a number of questions and then it gives you an option to start judging, which I feel like a lot of people in my generation would be like, yes. Yes, the moral machine.
Yeah, and so, if you start to go through some of those, you quickly realize that doing more good than bad is actually a very difficult thing to measure, and sometimes it's just not a very useful way to think about what is responsible or what is ethical. And so I think that for me, one of the big challenges for responsible innovation is, what is the underlying fundamental principle behind responsible innovation? I think we've come up with things like a list of principles, fairness, privacy, accountability,
Transparency.
transparency. I think all of those are super helpful, but they don't always answer what I think is one of the most important questions, which is, why are we
Why?
creating technology? Like, what is the driver? And when you start asking that question, at least in my mind, it very quickly becomes a deep philosophical question. And so, for me, and this is where I've come to understand things from my perspective. The why of technology is something like we build it to help fuel people's aspirations. Like that's loosely what it is. And, I've thought about this a lot and kind of backtracked and gone in a different direction and circled back again. But I think for me, that's a good helpful, like super high level why that then can inform how we think about transparency, fairness, and this and that and the other thing. But I don't think most people think about the why very often. And there's very little incentive to think about the why. So I think those are the two biggest misconceptions. And I think the first one is a little bit more straightforward to address. The second one I think is a little tougher.
Yeah. I think yes. So it is interesting to hear you say those things. One on the topic of like the why, it's like it feels like a question as old as time, right? Like, you know, and even I mean, if we're talking about there's what's the book? It's Tools and Weapons by Brad Smith, who's the chief legal officer of and president of Microsoft, and he talks about the day the fire horse lost its job. You know, where they no longer needed a horse to pull the carts to get the water to the fires in New York City. There was a day when they no longer needed those horses because there was the combustible engine and they were able to bring in like these fire engines and before the horse was pulling the carts, it was people pulling the carts, and so and I think that it is important for us to start asking that question a little bit more, especially in the world that we exist in right now, where but why are we doing this? And for a lot of people, the distance they've traveled from that question to an answer is just like dollars. They're like, money. It's because the money's out there and we're going to get it, but not really thinking beyond that. And so when we talk about things like ethical innovation, it makes me sad when people are like, this isn't even a real concept, or what even is this, because there is a way for us to think about, especially in the world of artificial intelligence. AI is a technology that from the beginning of its conception, which was not in 2022 for people who are like, we're talking, if we go in the way back machine before any of us were here and people were talking
Yes.
about what a world could look like, or before many of us were here, right? People were talking about what a world could look like with technology that could operate and do the things that humans do and operate on its own. We've come so far with this innovation, and we're in a position where now we have this technology, and because it is designed to mimic humans, it's just more, it can be more dangerous. It can also be more useful than a lot of technology.
Yeah.
But it can be more dangerous too. And that's why we have these conversations around the overarching philosophy. And then we get into what's your company and what's their values and how do you build in a way that aligns with your values. And then we talk about, okay, laws, you've got to follow those, and regulations and things like that. So yeah, I think that you laid both of those out really beautifully, and it makes me feel so encouraged because I feel like on TikTok it's a war out there. People are like, AI ethics aren't real.
Well, I'm glad people like you are fighting the good fight, because it's I don't want to be, there's no need to be dramatic about it, but we live in this world, we create things all the time, from the beginning of at least recorded human history, we're inventing things all the time that change our world. And are those things good or bad? It's hard to put such a clean label on any of the things we do. I do think you're right that AI, because of its nature, has the ability to really undermine or undercut the very things that make us feel like we're able to reach self actualization during our time on, everybody's respective time on this earth. I think it can undercut the things that make us feel alive and human and motivated. Um, will it do those things? Like, I don't know it. Like I said, I'm not trying to be dramatic. It's not going to like ruin everyone's life, but there is a world in which we create, for example, so many efficiency tools and so many ways to do things faster that the joy of creating something with your own hands, or um, the learning that happens when you work through a hard problem step by step by yourself, there's no room for that anymore because everything moves so fast and is so efficient, and that's a pretty rough life, I feel like, you
Yeah,
know?
totally. Totally. And I think that that's just one layer of this whole of the different impacts that this can have too. Like on a broad scale, I think that that's what a lot of people will experience in one way, shape, or form. Like it's the same thing with social media, right? They go on social media detoxes because it changes the way that they engage with the world, the way they engage with their life, how present they are, et cetera. I think it'll be the same with AI, where people will have these moments where they're like, I'm not in my personal life, I won't use AI, but in my business life, I will, or whatever it is. And then there's your people who are actually dealing with actual real harms, like being misidentified by facial recognition technology. So there's all these different levels and layers to what harm might actually look like, or what the impact of AI could actually look like. And and I think that the people who are out there doing the work around ethical tech and responsible AI and ethical innovation, all of these things, we're not out there because we're like, there's one way to do it and we know the way and we're going to tell you the way. We're out there because we're like, somebody's got to be prompting people to have these bigger conversations so that we can make businesses, for example, can make informed decisions about how they will build or deploy or use this technology instead of just like using it willy-nilly. So
Yes. No using it willy-nilly.
yeah, let us think. Let us all be thinkers in this space. So I think that it might be hard for people to welcome the promise of technology. Where do you think we are at right now in terms of like the law and rights and regulations from a US perspective? And what do you think we may see coming down the road in the next couple of years?
It's a great question. I laugh because I feel like I would have known how to even approach answering that question better like a year ago, or even before the election, before our most recent presidential election. I I'm not really sure what we're going to see in the next couple of years. I think that certainly the EU AI Act will gain maturity. It's kind of like with GDPR, it's a bit of a slow road for there to start to be a bit more clarity and enforcement. And I think there's still some time left before the EU AI Act even applies to certain aspects of it actually come into force for certain organizations. And I mentioned the EU AI Act because, as you and many people that listen probably know, it has an extraterritorial effect. And so that means that any kind of global organization that has some sort of connection with business in Europe is going to be, or business in the EU is going to be impacted by the EU AI Act. I think that there's going to be some innovation deterrence because of the UAI Act. I know that a lot of the policymakers designed that with small companies in mind, and they've really tried to be thoughtful about how to make it friendly for different kinds of businesses. But the fact is that it's I think it deters innovation in some ways. Um, so in the U.S., who really wants to be a big player in the economy, and we are in an AI driven economy of sorts right now, and we have other geopolitical concerns, namely China is definitely something that we're concerned about, a country we're concerned about. I can't imagine a an environment in the US in the next couple of years that prioritizes regulating AI. I just can't imagine that. Um, It doesn't mean states won't do it. That doesn't mean we won't see regulations that pop up maybe for different particular sectors or particular types of applications. Like for example, health applications, we may see some regulation there. But I, I'm a little bit unsure what's what's going to unfold. I just, I'd be curious to hear what you think. I can't imagine in the US in particular a very regulation focused environment for the next few years.
Yeah, I think and I think that what you've just shared too is the way a lot of different people are feeling right now. Anytime somebody comes on like YouTube and they're like, this is what regulation is going to look like in the US in the next 4 years, I'm like, unless you are in that office having those conversations and are now sharing this to the world without permission, this cannot possibly be it. And it's not that people aren't making educated guesses, but I think it's just almost impossible to know. I mean, the pace of AI change and scale is wild. So much so, I mean, I spent almost a year writing a master's thesis. And do you not want to know how long it took for that master's thesis to no longer be something that people could hang their hat on? Less than a year. I graduated, and then less than a year later, it was like, okay, everybody just throw this in the trash can because everything had so many things had changed in the world of AI. And so I think that it's almost impossible to know. I do think that you made this excellent point in kind of pointing out to folks and folks who didn't know, right, that in the EU AI Act, it does not matter if your business is headquartered in California. If you are doing business with AI in the EU, then you have to abide by those regulations. So what do you think are some approaches that we could take right now to affect some meaningful change that will protect people from nefarious uses of AI? Do you have any strong opinions on this?
I don't know if that they're strong opinions, but I have an opinion. So, what I'm about to say is a tall order, but it's what I think. I think that right now it would be amazing if we could get every organization who's building anything that has to do with AI to step back and think about some of the stuff that we discussed earlier, the why, and to think about why it is that they're building a product, what they think it's going to do in terms of creating value for people, what value might it destroy, and how can we perhaps minimize that, or think, be thoughtful about how that looks and how that manifests over time. Um, it's I think this is really product strategy work at the end of the day. It's quite a bit of design work. So it's already stuff that companies do when they're building products, but it's maybe adding a few different questions or reframing some of the questions that we ask at the beginning. Um, it also involves sometimes asking whether your business model makes sense. So personalized advertising, I always think that's a really interesting example. Almost nothing you do to mitigate the risks of personalized advertising are going to erase the harms that personalized advertising can impart upon people. And so if that is the core of your business model, there's nothing you can do to totally erase. I mean, you still might go forward with that business model, but you know, thinking about mitigating the risks after the fact, it's kind of like baking a cake and then saying, "Oops, I want to take out this one ingredient." Like you can't. You already baked the cake. so, um, so I think just I wish that we could get organizations to, as they're thinking and conceiving of products from the get-go, just flipping some of the questions that we ask about, like, what user problem are we solving, and then later going back and saying, okay, should we do this, and what risks have we created, and how can we address this risk? Maybe flipping the order, like what user problem are we solving, and should we be solving it? What are the different ways we can solve it? And of those different ways, are there options that are more value creating in the medium and long run, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So the reason I say this is because it is a tall order. It's asking people to think and to maybe slow down, though not radically. Uh, but the reason I think that that's something we could do right now is because it doesn't require a law. It doesn't require any technology. It just requires what we have in our heads. It requires our brains. It requires us to talk to each other and communicate, and maybe to ask a couple of additional questions and challenge ourselves to think more broadly about how we can create value through the products that we build in this world. Um, it'd be wonderful if we could find a policy-driven mechanism to incentivize people thinking about these things through money, as you mentioned earlier. Money is a great driver for these sorts of things. Um, but absent all of that stuff that usually takes forever to come to be, I think just encouraging companies and product leaders to think about these questions as early as possible would be great.
I think that's actually the first time that I've heard a call of that type. And I think it is, well, and it's the first time I've heard it in that way, because I think, a lot of responsible AI practitioners out there, myself included, that's the question we would ask in some way, shape, or form right off the top in having a conversation. It's like, why are you using this? What's the goal in using this? Why are you building this? What's the long-term goal in that? And being able to, boil that down to get a really good understanding. And what I think is interesting about you bringing up that question as well is not only does it give whatever the business is, an understanding of why they're building or using this technology, but it also gives them research shown that if you stop and consider and welcome in like responsible AI practices into your business, then it actually helps with longer term adoption of that AI technology. Why is that the case? Because people understand why you are actually building or using this technology. So sounds very simple. It would be very complicated to execute, but really simple for every business to do. And I really like that. So.
I'm going to borrow a phrase that a friend of mine said the other day about something. We were talking about something similar, and she said, "It's messy, but it's not hard." I think that's exactly right.
Yes, I think that that's a really beautiful way to put that. And that's like a lot of things, right? In life, like they're messy, but they're not exactly hard and complicated things for us to do. Just to end our final question, and this is, I speak with people on a regular basis who are reaching out asking, how do I get into the world of responsible AI or ethical tech? I always tell them personally that I think that there are infinite paths to get there. There's no one way. There's been no established path, right? So you just gotta follow your heart. You gotta follow your intuition. What advice do you have for people who are looking to get into the field of responsible AI or ethical tech?
Well, I think your advice and the things that you've talked about just now and then also earlier are exactly right. And at the end of the day, it's follow your curiosity. Responsible tech, responsible innovation, ethical tech, whatever you want to call it, it has infinite paths. It can take infinite forms. And so if you lean into the thing that you are super interested in, chances are there's a really strong connection between whatever that is and, responsible tech or responsible innovation. And if that connection doesn't exist, you can probably make the connection. You can probably invent the connection, because we're increasingly in a world where everything is tech driven and AI driven in some way, shape, or form. And so I don't think there's going to be any shortage of opportunity to impact or influence how it is that we build technology in responsible ways. So as long as you are passionate about the thing that you are doing and the thing that you're learning about, if it for whatever reason is not directly called responsible tech or responsible innovation, that doesn't mean that it can't become related to that somehow or can't impact that somehow. So I think it's a young enough field that there are a lot of opportunities to shape what it is that responsible innovation and responsible tech even means. And I think that, you mentioned this earlier, for some people that can be really daunting. And then for others, they don't mind the ambiguity. And then for those who find it daunting, I would definitely recommend to just reach out to people like yourself. I'm always happy to chat. There are tons of fantastic practitioners that you can find on social media. Look at what they do, ask them how they got there, and then, maybe start to collect some advice and make some sense of it. And then suddenly it becomes a little bit less daunting, I think, once you have real life examples in front of you.
Yeah, that's great advice. Well, I know that people are going to want to know where to find you and where they can connect with you. And you have an awesome blog. And I have been, so I have been pronouncing it call me Mapo, but somebody else recently, your nickname, which I say as Mapo, M-A-P-O, people will often say Mapo or Mapo. What is it?
It's
Tell the people.
MAPO, like map,
Mapo.
like a map to get you somewhere, and then
Yep.
O, and it's just my initials. It's just Maria Alejandra Parra-Orlandoni, uh, MAPO initials. That's all it
Which
is.
which I love, but I don't know why, but it's Mapo in my brain
That's
and I
all
have it.
right.
So Mapo, it's Mapo. Call me Mapo is your Substack. Where else can people find you?
I'm on LinkedIn. It's my full name again, or the little moniker "Call Me Mapo" is also what I use on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram from time to time, but that's usually where I post pictures of my dog. So if you're a dog person, it's "Call Me Mapo," but it's like call.me.mapo because "Call Me Mapo" was taken, all one word. That's it. Otherwise, I have a really cool website called spirare.tech, SPIRARE.tech. And that's the website I use to run some of my side gig stuff. So that includes speaking engagements. It includes, co-writing if that's something that's of interest to you. And then I do some discrete kind of one-off consulting projects through that as well. So reach out anytime. And I guess that's it.
That's awesome. And people are going to want to, they're going to want to find you. They're going to want to follow you because you've already had such a killer career and such a killer story. And I'm so excited to see like what happens next. So thank you so much for being on the Just AI podcast.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and I'm thrilled to be here. I love what you do. I am so honored to be part of this initiative that you're taking on with creating the podcast, and the blog that you write is fantastic. So just I'm honored to be a part of this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I